Hello everyone, this is Rig. Welcome to another episode of the Mauryan Empire. And today we are going to discuss about Emperor Ashoka, who was not only the most famous ruler in whole of Indian history, but also one of the most important ruler in the history of the world. So without doing any delay, let's get into details. Bindusar's reign overview. Now, before Ashok and after Chandragupta Maurya, there was another ruler called Bindusar. Not much is known about this ruler, but he was the son of Chandragupta Maurya and the father of Ashok. And he ruled for a considerable amount of time, that is approximately 30 years. So, before going into details about Ashok, we need to understand what kind of governance and administration was there at the time of Bindusar. Bindusar is known as Amitra Ghata, which means slayer of enemies, ruled from 299 to 274 BC and succeeded Chandragupta Maurya. So he came after Chandragupta Maurya and he ruled for about 25 to 30 years roughly, and he is known as Amitra Ghata, which translates to the words slayer of enemies. He faced two major revolts in Taxila, with the first revolt reportedly due to poor administration suppressed by Ashok. So there were two major revolts during his time as emperor, and the first revolt was because of poor administration, and it was suppressed by his son, who was later to become the most famous ruler in whole of the world, that is Emperor Ashok. Chanakya continued to serve Bindusar, destroying adversaries and securing Bindusar's control over 16 towns and kingdoms. So Chanakya, who was one of the most influential figures who helped Chandragupta Maurya to become the emperor, he continued to serve Bindusar also, and he helped Bindusar to control and secure over 16 towns and kingdoms, exchanged ambassadors with Hellenistic rulers, including Antiochus I of Syria and Ptolemy Philadelphus of Egypt. So these were the rulers with which he had exchange of ambassadors, and that we come to know from both the Greek sources and the Indian sources. If you want to know about India's relationship with Hellenistic ruler, how did it start, you will have to go through my video on Chandragupta Maurya. Bindusars requested wine and figs from Antiochus and philosophers from Greece, which was not fulfilled due to Greek laws against selling philosophers. So Bindusar requested some kind of facilities or items from other rulers like wine and figs from Antiochus, and he requested philosophers from Greece, but that request was not fulfilled because Greece people had a law that they can't sell philosophers. Thus we come to know that India had very cordial relationship with the Greek states. Now, Bindusar's governance. How was his administration and governance? He is described as an effective ruler, no detailed records of specific military conquests. So, even though we don't have any detailed records of specific military conquest, but keeping the empire of Chandragupta Maurya stable for 25 years or more is not a mere deal. It's not a very uh, it's not a thing which can be looked down upon. Therefore, he was undoubtedly one of the very effective rulers. Sushima was initially favored but failed in quelling the Taxila revolt, paving the way for Ashoka's rise. So, Sushima was the eldest son of Bindusar, and he was initially favored by the ruler, but when Sushima failed to he failed to deal with the revolt in Taxila. That time he was no more favored, and Ashok had the opportunity to show his administrative capability by suppressing the revolt in Taxila, played a crucial role in consolidation of Bindusara's rule across newly acquired territories. Bindusar's interest in philosophy led to requests for Greek scholars reflecting cultural and intellectual openness. So he was very much advanced and progressive culturally and intellectually. That can be known from the fact that he requested Greek philosophers into his own court. Details of Bindusara's rule and conflicts, especially in Taxila, are noted in historical texts but with limited detailed military accounts. So, we come to know about a few instances of Bindusar's rule, but detailed military record are not available from the time of Bindusar's reign as the Mauryan emperor. Now, Ashok's ascension and early challenges. How did he come to be the emperor as we know of him as today? And how did he ascend to the throne? And what were the early challenges he faced? Ashok faced a major revolt in Taxila soon after his ascension, which he successfully suppressed, unlike his brother Shushima. So, his elder brother Shushima failed to suppress the revolt in Taxila, but as soon as Ashok rose to prominence, he faced this revolt, and it was very major and high uprising revolt, and he suppressed it with very efficient hands, eliminated all of his 99 brothers except Trishya to secure the throne, earning the title Chand Ashok, which means Ashok the Fierce. Chand Ashok is a term attributed to the early phase of Ashok's life where he was very much violent, and that can be known from the fact that he eliminated all of his 99 brothers except one Trishya, and thus he secured his throne and he gained the title Chand Ashok. Ashok's formal coronation occurred 4 years after he effectively took power, during which he consolidated his rule. So, for 4 years, he couldn't sit on the throne, and the formal coronation took place 4 years after he effectively took power. Thus, he consolidated his rule. He married Maharani Devi and fathered children including Mahendra and Sanghamitra, who later promoted Buddhism. So it's not that Ashok only took one wife, he had many wives. Among them, the most prominent was Maharani Devi, and their children was Mahendra and Sanghamitra, who later were sent to different parts of his empire and beyond to promote Buddhism. Ashok initially continued the expansionist policies of his predecessors before turning towards Buddhism post Kalinga. Now, Ashok's strategies for power consolidation. How was his strategy for power consolidation? He demonstrated his capability as a leader by effectively managing the revolt in Taxila, a crucial economic and strategic region. So, Taxila is present in the northwestern part of Indian subcontinent, and it is not only a center for education, but also it was the connecting part between Asia, Central Asia, and India, and major trade routes pass through Taxila. Hence, revolt being occurred there is of a great significance because of the strategic and economic location of Taxila. And Ashok demonstrated his capability as a leader by suppressing the revolt in one of the most important territorial part of Mauryan Empire. He was supported by ministers such as Radhagupta during his rise to power, indicating a network of loyal advisors. So it's not only that he did everything single handedly, he had support of brilliant ministers and advisors. One such minister is noted to be Radhagupta, only spared his brother Trishya during his rise, indicating a ruthless approach to securing his position as emperor. So it is said that Ashok had more than 100 brothers, and he killed every one of them except one brother called Trishya. And thus we know how violent and ruthless he was in the aggressive approach to gain power. He employed both military and political strategies to stabilize and expand his authority across the Mauryan Empire. It's not that everywhere he launched military campaigns, but also sometimes he preferred political strategies to stabilize and expand his authority. His ascension and an early reign marked by significant political maneuvering as noted in various historical accounts. So his ascension and early reign are marked by significant political changes in the whole of the subcontinent, uh, and those have been noted in various texts and inscriptions. Now, Ashok's approach to rebellion. How did he approach the rebellion? We will discuss this on the context of his acts in Taxila. Initially known for harsh governance style, as seen in his handling of the Taxila revolt. So, at first stage of his career, Ashok was very much harsh and ruthless, and that can be seen in the way of how he handled the revolt in Taxila. Taxila was a vital administrative and economic center, making its stability crucial for Ashoka's early rule. So, Taxila, as we have said, is not only a center for education but also a center for trade and commerce, and thus uh, keeping Taxila peaceful was very much necessary for the stability of Ashok's rule. He shifted from harsh methods to more benevolent governance following his conversion to Buddhism. After Kalinga War, he is said to have been very much peaceful and benevolent in his approach towards governance. Like his grandfather Chandragupta, relied heavily on advisors to manage rebellions and administer governance. So, like his grandfather Chandragupta, who was one of the most important characters in whole of Indian history, he also relied heavily on intelligent advisors and bureaucracy to manage rebellions and administer governance. Taxila's handling set a precedent for how Ashoka would deal with other administrative challenges across the empire. So, Taxila was not only significant because of Ashoka's ascension to the throne, but also the way in which Ashoka dealt with Taxila made an example of how he would deal with the people who is against him. Kaling War prelude and consequences. Now, Kaling War is one of the most significant event in Ashok's career, and how did it come to be? In the 13th year of Ashoka's reign, he initiated the conquest of Kaling, which was not yet under Mauryan control and known for its strategic and economic significance. The area of Kaling is approximately the area of Utkal, or the area of Odisha in present context. So that area was not under Mauryan rule, and it was very much significant for its trading outlets, and therefore in the 13th year of Ashok's reign he initiated the conquest of Kaling. The war resulted in approximately 1 lakh deaths, 1 lakh 50,000 deportations, and many more were adversely affected, leading to widespread suffering. You should not judge the casualty of Kalinga War merely on the numbers. If 1 lakh people are dead, that means more than 10 lakh families would have been affected, and that is quite a huge amount considering the population at that time. So the war resulted in approximately 1 lakh death and 1 lakh 50,000 deportation, which means that approximately 20 to 30 lakh people were directly affected by the war in Kaling. Deeply moved by devastation and loss of life, Ashoka experienced a profound transformation and embraced Buddhism. So, this Kaling War affected his mental health, and from being a very aggressive ruler who used to deal with rebellions very much in a ruthless manner, he turned to be a ruler who transformed and embraced Buddhism, non-violence, and peaceful approaches towards his governance policies. Rock Edict 13 describes Ashok's reaction to Kalinga War, highlighting his subsequent commitment to non-violence and welfare of his subjects. So the Rock Edict 13 describes the war in Kalinga, and these figures that there were 1 lakh deaths and 1 lakh 50,000 deportations, all these figures can be obtained from Rock Edict 13 only. And it also describes of how Ashoka changed his approach towards his governance after the war in Kalinga. Post-war, Ashoka renounced armed conquest and focused on dharma vijay, means victory through righteousness and moral conquest. Now here dharma should not be confused with the term religion. Dharma in ancient Indian context doesn't mean religion. It means righteousness and moral ethics through which one should lead their life. So after the war, Ashok renounced every kind of armed conquest, and it is said to be the last war in his career, and he focused on Dharma Vijay, means victory through righteousness and moral conquest. Now, timing of conversion debate. Many historians like to project the fact that after the war, Ashok converted to Buddhism, but it's not actually true. Ashokan inscriptions provide the source that the edicts of Ashoka, which are primary source for understanding his reign and conversion, do not explicitly state that Kaling War was the reason for his conversion to Buddhism. The edicts describe his support for Buddhism and his moral and ethical concern, which suggest pre-existing familiarity with Buddhist teachings. So all the edicts support the fact that he was a Buddhist, but it cannot be said that he converted to Buddhism after the Kaling War. That cannot be explicitly said from the Ashokan inscriptions. Now, timing of edicts. Some scholars argue that the timing of the issuance of certain edicts suggests pre-war conversion. If Ashoka had been influenced by Buddhist principles before the war, it could explain his remorseful reaction to violence and his subsequent emphasis on Dhamma, which is the moral law in his governance. There is lack of direct evidence. There is no inscriptional evidence linking his conversion explicitly to Kaling War. The narrative of conversion post Kaling is largely derived from Buddhist texts written centuries later, like Ashoka Vadana and Deepa Vamsha, which may have aimed to highlight the dramatic conversion story to enhance the moral and religious message. So all this story regarding how Ashok converted to Buddhism after Kaling War has been highlighted in Buddhist texts which were written centuries after Ashok's reign. Therefore, we cannot surely say that this is a true fact. Buddhist councils. Historical records about convening of Buddhist council under Ashok's patronage suggest his deep involvement in Buddhist affairs, which indicate an earlier conversion. Now, if you are so deeply involved in Buddhism, that means there was conversion much earlier than the war of Kaling. Archaeological evidence such as stupas and monasteries that he built indicates patronage of Buddhism that would require significant period of planning and development, hinting that his engagement with Buddhism started well before the Kaling War. Some historians suggest that the dramatic story of Ashok's post-war remorse and conversion could be constructed narrative by Buddhist monks to highlight the transformative power of Buddhism. In order to show that Buddhism can change one's life, it can be assumed that many of the Buddhist monks wrote text centuries after Ashok's reign to project the fact that Ashok converted to Buddhism after the Kaling War. But from the inscriptional evidences and the lack of any direct evidence supporting this fact, we can assume that Ashok was already a Buddhist at the time of Kalinga War. Now, impact of Kalinga War on governance. What impact did the Kalinga War had on governance? After witnessing the horrors of war, Ashok integrated Buddhist principles of non-violence and compassion into his administration. It's not that he converted to Buddhism, but he definitely integrated the Buddhist principles after the Kalinga War, initiated extensive public welfare programs, including the construction of hospitals, roads, and educational facilities. So, after the war with Kaling, Ashok did not have anything else to conquer. That is one of the reason he dedicated his life to public welfare programs like construction of hospitals, roads, and educational facilities. He enforced policies that prohibited animal sacrifices and festive gatherings involving animal slaughters. So he did not advocate to animal eating or non-veg diet, and thus he prohibited all forms of animal sacrifices and festive gatherings that required animals to be slaughtered, shifted his foreign policy from military conquest to diplomatic and cultural exchanges to spread dharma. Here again, dharma does not mean religion of Buddhism or Hinduism. It means projecting the moral and ethical principles with which one should lead their life. So his foreign policy shifted from military conquest to diplomatic and cultural exchanges. He utilized edicts to propagate his new policies across the empire, ensuring that his messages of dharma and peace reached all corners of his realm. So he put on edicts or commissioned edicts across his empire, and in those edicts, what did he write? He wrote the ethical principles with which one should conduct their life, and that is Ashokan Dhamma. Now, post war reforms and religious shift. What were the post war reforms that he undertook, and how the religion of Indian subcontinent shifted as a result of war with Kaling? Formally adopted Buddhism, he was a Buddhist from before only, as said by many of the evidences currently researched, but he formally adopted Buddhist principles after the Kaling War, influencing the empire's cultural and ethical directives towards nonviolence and moral governance. So the whole directive of the empire shifted towards nonviolence and moral and ethical principles of governance. He supported the spread of Buddhism both within and outside India through missions to places like Sri Lanka, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia. So it's not only that he propagated Buddhism within within his own empire, he sent ambassadors to Sri Lanka, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia also. He enacted reforms focusing on the humane treatment of prisoners, from treatment of subjects, and abolition of unnecessary violence. So, all the prisoners which were captured during his military campaigns were treated very much humanely, and he treated his subjects with utmost care and kindness, and thus he abolished every form of unnecessary violence. He fostered a synthesis of cultural practices that promoted religious tolerance and understanding across diverse population. He reorganized the administration to better reflect his new policies of welfare and moral righteousness. So, all of his focus of administration, including the monetary resources, were spent on welfare policies and moral righteousness, which was before extinguished for his military campaigns. Now, Ashok's religion, integration, and tolerance. What kind of religious ideology did he follow after Kalinga War, and how did he integrate different other religious views into his tolerative mindset? Promoted Buddhism as a state religion while advocating for religious tolerance and coexistence among various religious groups. Now, the state religion was Buddhism. That does not mean that he abolished all other forms of religion. He was quite tolerant to accept many other forms of religion also into his ideological principle. But recent research shows that even after the Kalinga War, there was violence against Hinduism and Jainism. So that is very much confusing, keeping in view that many more new researches are being conducted, which contradict this view of tolerance and peacefulness after Kalinga War. Sponsored major Buddhist councils debates to discuss and disseminate Buddhist doctrines. So he sponsored many Buddhist gatherings, he patronized Buddhism, and he organized debates to discuss and disseminate the Buddhist doctrines. He emphasized on the importance of moral and ethical behavior through personal example and state policy. So, a personal life that he led was very much based on the moral and ethical principles of Buddhism, and therefore he set himself as an example of how one should conduct their life. And so, the state policy of non-violence and religious tolerance also changed along with his personal principles. He appointed special officers known as Dhamma Mahamatyas, whose duty was to oversee the administration of justice and propagate Dharma. So these were special officials who were employed in different parts of his empire, and they focused on the duty to oversee administration and justice of moral and ethical principles which he propagated as Dhamma in his empire. He commissioned the construction of numerous stupas and monuments like that stand today as archaeological landmarks of his reign. So this was for the first time in the central part of Indian subcontinent that grand archaeological projects were taken, like building of stupas and monuments, few of which survive even today. Now, promotion of Buddhism. How did he promote Buddhism, and how did he dedicate his life to establishing Buddhism as the main religion in the whole of Indian subcontinent? He dispatched Buddhist missions to foreign lands including Kashmir, Gandhar, and also to Greek kings Antiochus, Ptolemy, Antigonus, Magus, and Alexander, as mentioned in the text. Now, here Alexander should not be confused with Alexander the Great. This was the descendant of Alexander the Great. So, he supplied or launched several foreign missions in places like Kashmir, Gandhar, which were within his own territory, and as foreign lands, he chose Greek kings and Egyptian kings as place to propagate the religion of Buddhism. He built thousands of stupas across India to promote Buddhism, with famous sites including Sanchi and Varhut noted for their architectural significance. So, Sanchi stupa and Varhut stupa are the earliest Buddhist structures in the Indian subcontinent, and those were initiated or built by Emperor Ashoka, which survive even today. And thus, with the building of thousands of stupas across Indian subcontinent, he helped to promote Buddhism. He organized the Third Buddhist Council in Patliputra, which played a crucial role formalizing the Buddhist canon and expanding its teaching. So, this was the Buddhist Council where Buddhist canon was formalized, and the Third Buddhist Council was organized in Patliputra, which was one of the most significant event in Buddhist history that helped to promote Buddhism across the Indian subcontinent. He utilized major rock edicts, particularly Rock Edict 12 and 13, to outline his moral and ethical policies, encouraging non-violence and respect for all forms of life. So, major rock edicts like Rock Edict 12 and 13 outline his policy of righteousness and ethical means with which he encouraged nonviolence and respect to all forms of life. His effort led to adaptation of Buddhism in regions like Sri Lanka, evidenced by historical records such as Mahavamsa. Even today in Sri Lanka and southeast part of Asia, Buddhism is one of the most significant religion followed, and that started with Ashok promoting Buddhism in those parts. Now, Ashok's religious tolerance and diversity. How was his religious tolerance, and what are the diversities of ideological principles in his empire? Although a Buddhist, Ashok promoted religious pluralism, allowing the practice of different religion within his empire. So he was a Buddhist, he promoted Buddhism, he established Buddhism as the state religion, but he supported other religion also as long as it did not interfere with his choice of righteousness and moral discipline. Therefore, he allowed practice of different religion within his empire. The Major Rock Edict 6 explicitly called for respect among different religious sects, promoting an atmosphere for religious harmony and understanding. So, in the Major Rock Edict 6, we get an evidence of his tolerance and promotion towards religious diversity. Despite his Buddhist leanings, Ashok maintained Hindu festivals and rituals, ensuring cultural continuity. So, the culture of the land was based on Hindu festivals. No matter how much Buddhist he was, he promoted culture of the land, and that included maintaining of Hindu festivals and rituals. But he was strongly in objection towards the rituals that required sacrifice of animals. His policies led to significant changes in social welfare, emphasizing the importance of ethical treatment and compassion towards all beings. So there was a significant change in the mindset of the people, where the emperor himself focused on importance of ethical treatment and compassion to all human beings, to all beings rather. He encouraged philosophical debates and discussion, fostering a vibrant intellectual culture in ancient India. So there were different kinds of debates organized in his own court, where he argued with different with people of opposing views, and thus he fostered a vibrant intellectual culture in his court. Now, all his religious tolerance and diversity may not have been true, providing to the recent researchers where it can be seen that Ashok was quite violent towards Jainism and other aspects of Hinduism also. So, the recent researchers regarding Ashok contradict many of the view which we have discussed here. Now, effort in spreading Buddhism internationally. What was his effort to spread Buddhism outside Indian subcontinent? He sent envoys and missionaries to regions beyond India, including Central Asia, the Hellenistic kingdoms, to preach Buddhism. So he sent many of his own relatives also. He sent there in Central Asia and other Hellenistic kingdoms, where they preached Buddhism. Some of Ashokan edicts were inscribed in Greek and Aramaic, aiming to reach a broader audience. So, in Central Asia, Greek and Aramaic were the languages with which people dealt, and therefore, to spread his message in every kind of vernacular language, he wrote his edicts in Greek and Aramaic also. He maintained correspondence with other contemporary rulers to facilitate the spread of Buddhist principles. In order to spread Buddhist principles, he maintained quite cordial and exchangeable relationship with other contemporary rulers of his time, and few of the rulers are mentioned before in this presentation. His efforts are credited with laying foundation for Buddhism's later growth in East Asia, particularly in China, Korea, and Japan. So, his efforts of promoting Buddhism outside India led to promotion of Buddhism in the succeeding centuries in places like China, Korea, and Japan. He promoted the exchange of ideas, cultural practices through diplomatic missions, exchanging cross cultural interactions. So, Asok was very much of a global ruler, considering the fact that he was well connected with all the contemporary rulers of his time. Even though he was very powerful, more powerful than any other ruler of that time, still he did not conquer any other Greek or Egyptian ruler, which he could have probably done easily. But he turned his attention towards diplomatic relations and cross cultural interactions. Now, foreign policy shift. What was the shift in foreign policy of Ashok? After the Kalinga War, Ashok declared his dedication to non-violence and shifted his focus from conquest to diplomatic engagement. We have discussed this before, that all of his focus, not only his emotional focus, but all of the monetary resources of the state, was also extinguished for his dedication towards nonviolence and diplomatic engagements. He advocated for peace and diplomacy over military expansion, which was reflected in his communications with neighboring states. So, from his interactions with other contemporary rulers, we get to know that he advocated for peace and diplomacy over military expansion. Even though it is quite surely, it can quite surely be said that with military expansion, he could have conquered a lot more territory than what he had conquered in during his reign. The Rock Edict 13. This edict details Ashok's regret over Kalinga War and his commitment to non-violence and moral conquest. So the Rock Edict 13 details Ashok's regret over Kalinga War, and they also provide the figures of death and destructions of Kalinga War, and thus this Rock Edict 13 is very much significant for showing the change of his moral character after Kalinga War. He encouraged his neighbors to adopt similar policies of nonviolence and moral governance, extending his impact beyond borders. So he not only propagated these moral principles in his own empire, but also he encouraged the other contemporary rulers to set an example of ruling with non-violence and moral governance. These officers were tasked with promoting peace and ethical governance both within and outside Mauryan Empire. So there were Dhamma Mahamatyas, who were officers whose sole duty was to protect the ethical governance from within and outside his dominion. Now, ideal kingship. Ashok set an example of ideal kingship. And how did he do that? Embrace the concept of kingship as a tool for serving the welfare of his subjects, strongly influenced by his adaptation of Buddhism post Kaling. So Ashok set an example of how a king should not be power hungry or aggressive. Rather, he should dedicate his life as a servant of his subjects. Major Rock Edict 1 emphasizes his policy of treating all subjects as his children and his dedication to their welfare and moral development. So, the Major Rock Edict 1 is solely dedicated for the purpose of projecting the view that all subjects are his children, and to think about the welfare of his children is the sole purpose of his life. He promoted dharma, which means moral law, as the central principle in administrative policies, aiming to create a just and human society. So, his promotion of dharma was the central principle of all his administrative policies. He focused on transparency, efficiency, and responsiveness in administration, including regular tours in his empire to gauge the population's condition and address their issues. So he quite evidently surveyed his territories and interacted with common people in order to understand the situation in which his subjects are living in. He established a fair judicial process and was particularly concerned with humane treatment of prisoners as highlighted in the edicts. So his judicial process was very much fair, and its sole concern was to treat his subjects properly, and he also advocated to humane treatment towards prisoners. Ethical governance. Ethical governance was the concept which was promoted by Ashok, and that is still now the basis of Indian governance. Post Kaling, Ashok abolished practices such as physical punishment and aimed to replace them with rehabilitative measures. So he did not advocate physical punishment for any crimes after the Kaling War, and he focused on rehabilitative measures. He initiated the construction of hospitals for humans and animals and improved infrastructure such as roads, waterways for the benefit of common people. So, all the welfare activities were undertaken after his Kaling War because of the principle of ethical governance. He advocated for the protection of flora and fauna as reflected in Rock Edict 4, emphasizing ecological awareness and conservation. So it's not that he only constructed welfare activities and promoted wellness of all beings. He also advocated for the protection of natural habitat, that is flora and fauna, as has been reflected in the Rock Edict 4. He issued edicts that promoted not only physical well being but also moral virtues among his subjects. So, his edict did not only focused on physical well being but also emotional or moral virtues among his subjects. He instructed his officials to lead by example, practicing morality and diligence, which he believed were key to effective governance. So, thus was the principle of ethical governance set, which set an example for all the future emperors in India. Now, what was the extent of Ashok's empire? How was it geographically spread? At its peak, Ashok's empire covered most of the Indian subcontinent, extending from present day Afghanistan in the west to Bangladesh in the east, and from Himalayas in the north to south beyond modern day Karnataka. In his edict, we get the words like Chodelas or Kedalaputtas, which means the empire of Cholas and the area of Kerala. And thus, we can assume the fact that his uh, empire extended beyond modern day Karnataka also. Rock Edict 5 describes the administrative division of empire into provinces with centers at Taxila, Ujjain, Tosali, Suvarnagiri, managed by prince governors or high officials. So his empire, just like the empire of his grandfather, was divided into different provinces, and the centers of those provinces were at Taxila, Ujjain, Toshali, and Suvarnagiri. They were managed by governors who were also prince in the royal family. He utilized a network of roads to enhance communication and mobility across the empire, facilitating trade and rapid military movement. So, trade and rapid military movement is only possible when there is proper communication. Therefore, he utilized a network of roads to emphasize on proper communication. He managed a diverse empire with various ethnic, cultural, and religious groups implementing policies that promoted unity and cooperation. The Mauryan capital was Patliputra. It served as an administrative and cultural heart of the empire, and it was supported by various other major urban centers that played crucial role in regional governance. Now, Ashok's legacy and the dissolution of the empire. What was the legacy of this great emperor? Ashok's policies and governance style had lasting impact on subsequent Indian rulers who drew on his legacy of ethical rule and welfare oriented governance. So, he was an example or the role model of many future rulers. Following his death, the Mauryan Empire gradually fragmented and was unable to maintain the unity and strength that characterized Ashoka's reign. So, after Ashoka, his empire broke into many parts. Historians and scholars continue to debate the reasons behind the rapid decline, citing possible overextension, administrative challenges, and succession issues. Ashok's promotion of Buddhism and his edicts have left a lasting and cultural and religious imprint on Indian subcontinent and beyond. The discovery of Ashok's edict in 19th century rekindled interest in Mauryan history and provided critical insights into ancient Indian governance and society. Many of the Ashokan inscriptions are still being discovered. Many new informations are also coming into light in 21st century. Thus, whatever I have discussed in this presentation may not be actually true, 100% true. There are many views by modern historians which contradict all these views, and that is very much respected in my view. And thus we came to know a lot about Ashok. In my next videos of Mauryan Empire, I am going to delve deep into the administrative capabilities of Mauryan Empire, the measures undertaken by Mauryan Empire, and several other archaeological aspects also. So please support me so that I can bring brighter contents in future. Thank you so much.